I'm pleased to welcome you to this event entitled A World to Win, where we are joined by an amazing platform of international speakers to look at how we build movements across borders for people, planet, peace, and a better world. As I said, this is part of Arise, an online festival of left ideas, and kindly today's event is supported by the Peace and Justice Project. I'm Matt Wilgress, National Organiser for Arise. As many of you will know, Arise is a celebration of our socialist values of peace, internationalism, solidarity and unity, and we're delighted to have so many of you with this discussion as part of that today. As our speakers will go on to discuss in depth, we are going through a number of major and simultaneous crises, both here and internationally, from the climate catastrophe that puts the very future of humanity at risk, to the wars and conflicts that scar so much of the world, to the deep refugee crisis, and of course, in many countries, a cost of living emergency that affects how broken the capitalist economic system we live under is. In response, we need to put forward ways to transform our world and put people and planet first. And as part of this, we need to build movements for justice around the world and across borders. Part of this, of course, must be progressive international cooperation on the left. And that's why we're so delighted to have this global platform today and be building links with and between socialist and other progressive movements in Latin America, Africa, Europe, the US and beyond. And part of this must be standing with all those social movements globally that are looking to change the future of the world for the better and build a more peaceful future. So it's great to be hearing from some of these today as well. As the speaker in our last session said, the ruling class and ruling elites organise across borders, and we need to too. As the event goes on, please post your questions in the Q&A section on Zoom, and we will look to put some to our panel towards the end of the event. Also, please make sure to let us know where you're tuning in from. We love to hear about people where you're tuning in from in Britain and around the world, and also post comments as well, and I'm sure to give some shout outs and read out as many comments as I can. Please also keep an eye out for links, including to buy a ticket for the whole festival and to donate to Arise in the chat. Without any further ado now, I'm delighted to welcome our first speaker. She's speaking on behalf of Progressive International, Aline Piva, and is from Brazil, where obviously there was a very heroic defeat of the far right recently, and is somewhere where a lot of interesting developments are going on. Aline, it's an absolute pleasure to have you joining us again today, and thank you for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you so much, Matt, for the invitation. I would like also to thank everyone that is here, the panelists and everyone that worked to organize this wonderful event. It's really an honor to be here today. And I wanted to talk about two things mainly. First of all, I wanted to give a bit of update on how things are going here in Brazil right now. I know that many of you have worked really hard to denounce the ongoing coup against Dilma Rousseff several years ago, and worked throughout all these years to denounce all the unraveling and the attacks that were made by Jair Bolsonaro here in Brazil against the Brazilian people, the indigenous communities, all the people who were struggling to keep everything that we had conquered in previous years. So I wanted to give a little bit of update on that, and then move to what the Progressive International is doing, not only here in Brazil, but elsewhere. Lula's election, then I had the honor to have Jeremy Corbyn here with us in the second round of the elections, in the first round, sorry, second round of the elections, following closely how were the climate in the streets, the hope that were taking place here in Brazil at that time. And this was wonderful. This was really important to have. This was a very important moment to see how international solidarity and the international support played an important role, because we saw, and we are now going through all the legal stages to investigate. We know that they were real and clear attempts of a coup, another coup here in Brazil during the elections last year. We saw the use of state money, we saw the use of the institutions here to try to prevent the election of the favorite, again, Lula da Silva. Nevertheless, Lula won and is now implementing a series of changes in the country that is going to be extremely important for the people as a whole, but especially for popular movements, for social movements, to regain the space that we lost in the previous years. So what we are seeing now is a broad program to implement agrarian reform in the country. The president has stated that moving forward with this is one of his priorities right now. We have seen the reconnection or the restart of programs that are really important to fight back housing inequality and the lack of housing available in urban areas. We have seen the creation of the Minister of the Indigenous People, Racial Equality. We again have a Minister of Women and Social Equality. So little by little, what we are seeing, what we are witnessing here in Brazil is a kind of the rebuilding of a state that is concerned with its people, with the building of a space where people, where popular movements can thrive. But that's not enough. We know that this is not enough because we are fighting back something that is an international movement. We know that there is this reactionary international, this far-right international that is extremely organized, that is very well connected. And what we need to fight this back is to build our own movement. And that's where the work of Progressive International comes in, and it's so important. What we are building right now is a platform, is a space where people from different walks of life, from different struggles, from different movements can come together and fight back what is needed and continue building on this platform that is related to the people, to the people's need, to building popular power so we can have real, strong democracies where we can keep winning, where we can keep fighting back all those forces that doesn't want us there. We have two important initiatives. One is going to take place here in Brazil, where we are bringing together several activists, politicians from different parts of the country, so we can do something similar as we are doing here today, exchanging ideas, building on our collective power. And the second is the foundation of what we are calling exactly the Reactionary International. That is sort of a think tank where we are going to unravel all these different ways the far right is using to keep on doing what they have been doing for the past almost decade now. So I think this is really important. I am almost finishing with my time, so I wanted to thank you all again. I'll be here if you have any questions, if you wanted to know anything more about what is taking place, this beautiful time, hopeful time that we are living here in Brazil, and also for the work of Progressive International. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that contribution, and good to have some good news at the start of the meeting. When we were talking just before the meeting, we were saying, getting ourselves quite depressed, talking about different crises in the world, but there also are solutions to these crises, and part of that is movement building, and part of that is progressive policy solutions. So it's great to have you with us. Before we move to our next speaker, we have a short announcement from Logan, who many of you will know as one of the Arise volunteers and also an activist with the NEU. Over to you, Logan.
Hi all, I'll try and keep this brief because we do have some fantastic speakers from across the world. And the reason I'm trying to chat to you today is to ask for your help. We in Arise need help to try and keep growing, to try and keep bettering and holding events like these where we have, I think it's fair to say, quite a global platform, speakers from many different continents. But we can only do that if we have some help from you guys. And a key way to do that is the donate link in the chat below, which I'm sure will be posted. You could also, if you do maybe fancy a bit more of a regular contribution to the work of Arise and to keep us going into our more physical stage of meetings as we come towards the end of the year, then you can become a friend of Arise for £5 a month. We also, obviously we're aware times are tough, so not everybody can or is in a position to donate to us. You can help us grow by supporting our meeting on Wednesday, the 28th of June, which promises to be a really fantastic meeting of people, including my own union's Senior Vice President, Emma Rose, who I can safely say is a fantastic speaker and can highly recommend listening to her, and Beth Winter, alongside comrades in Socialist Future. So please, if you can, donate. If you feel you can, become a friend of Arise, and I hope to see you on Wednesday. It's also my birthday, so hopefully see you there. Have a good one. Thank you.
Thank you, Logan, and happy birthday from all of us, I'm sure. If you can give some support to Arise, please do. It's great I can see we've now got over 300 people joined us live, and it's growing fast. If you are on Twitter or Facebook watching the stream, please share away. It does make a big difference to our numbers. Our next speaker is the president of the Party of the European Left, based in Austria, and it's a privilege to introduce Walter Baier. Welcome, Walter.
Hi. Thank you very much for having me. It's a good feeling to take part in this adventure of creating new ties between the progressives all over the world. A couple of words about Europe. Europe and the European left are in a very peculiar period of transition. You have on the one side huge social movements, as we saw in France, in Greece, in Spain, in Portugal, even in the Czech Republic and elsewhere. You could say class issues and gender issues are back on the European agenda. This is also demonstrated by the polls which are available. Eurobarometer, for example, says that 93% of the people are worried about the rising cost of living, 82% about poverty, 81% each about climate change and the spread of the Ukraine war. On the other hand, and that is also displayed in the data, is that half of the citizens, and especially young people, think simply that their voices and their votes do not count. And this contradiction actually creates the atmosphere in which the radical right, the neo-fascist parties rise and grow. We see that also across Europe: Italy, Portugal, Spain, France, Germany, Austria, even in Scandinavia and Finland, and also in the recently held elections last weekend, actually, yesterday, the elections in Greece. So the biggest challenge for the left in Europe is to develop an efficient counter strategy to the rise of the far right. And in order to do so, I think we must acknowledge that there is a two-pronged attack on democracy and progressives in Europe. On the one side, this is the frustration of the people about the neoliberal counter-reforms, about that their voices are not heard, partially expressed through abstention at elections. On the other hand, you have a growing authoritarian inclination of the ruling elites, also demonstrated by the adoption of the agenda of the far right by conservative parties in different countries. That means what we actually need is a radical socialist, ecological, and feminist program for a radical left, which does not only address the rise of the far right, but also listen to the people and expresses their wishes, their griefs, their demands, and take them seriously and transform them into social movement and into a change of the political power relations. Indeed, if you look at the last years, there were no minor successes achieved in social struggles. Minimum wage directive, platform workers directives. We support all the campaigns of the ETUC for a social progress protocol and for a strengthening of the social pillar of the European Union. But what we also have to admit is that under current conditions, progress can only assert itself exceptionally and against great resistance. Why it is so? Because there still is an hegemony of neoliberalism within the ruling elites and also in the middle stratas of the societies. And the same applies for the climate crisis. Almost certain that we will miss the 1.5 degree goal. Why is it so? Because in fact, green capitalism, so often evoked, is an oxymoron, as the accumulation-driven logic of capitalism cannot, by its character, be sensitive to any limits to the exploitation of people and nature. And this is also about class and gender, as it is an established fact that 10% of the income earners in Europe are accountable for 50% of the CO2 emissions. So what we have to create is a strong alliance between the social movements, the trade unions on the one side, the political left on the other side, and the ecological and feminist movements in order to counter the crisis which we see and also the political offensive by the far right. Let me say only one word about the war in the Ukraine, which makes all our discourses about progressive reforms hypothetical. Just what happened last Saturday. A warlord, a criminal, a gangster actually, was on the verge of gaining possession of nuclear warheads. And that's the situation. And we must not allow the European people to accommodate to war and to militarism as a normality. War has triggered an immense ecological disaster. And this means, in the first place, this must stop. And there exists no other way as political and democratic means as they were put forward by Lula, the Vatican, the People's Republic of China, and the EU must act accordingly. And finally, let me say about the left in Europe. The left in Europe could establish itself as a political factor in the 90s and in the year 2000. But what is also true is that it did not manage to overcome its fragmentation. And this fragmentation is actually one of the reasons of the weaknesses. We see this fragmented left that can be explained historically, wounds of the past, real strategic differences in the concrete situations of the different countries. But in the face of the rise of the far right and the crisis which we are in, we cannot remain in our echo chambers. We are aware of our diversity, of our diversities. We respect it, but we also see that there is much more that unites us than that divides us. That's why the Party of the European Left has adopted in its General Assembly celebrated last weekend a call to all left forces and socialist and feminist forces in Europe, a call for unity in order to give strength to those forces in Europe to resist the onslaught of the far right, for a peaceful Europe, for a Europe of common security, for a feminist and a social just and a democratic Europe. I think I made it in 8 minutes. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Walter. Yes, exceptional timekeeping from our Austrian comrade there. Thank you so much for being with us, and we look forward to hearing more from you in the discussion. I've just been sent a list of places where people are tuning in from here in Britain. It's a bit long, but I will give a few shout outs. Welcome to people from Sutton, Leeds, London, Manchester, Bradford, Wales, Stroud, Stockport, Wrexham, Edinburgh, Belfast, Woking, Paisley, Winchester, Southampton, Liverpool, and many more places. I can see our numbers are still growing, so please do share those streams and hit the retweet button as well. And also, someone is asking in the Q&A about Wednesday's closing rally with the striking workers, supporting the striking workers joint with Socialist Future and Young Labour. That starts at 6:30, and a link will be posted in the chat that you can register at. Our next speaker is Jawad Moustakbal, who's joining us from Morocco, where the annual meeting of the IMF and World Bank is taking place soon, and is also from the Committee for the Abolition of Illegitimate Debt, which is something I'd very much recommend you check out, and also a member of ATTAC. Over to you, Jawad, and thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Matt. Can you hear me?
All good.
Perfect. So thank you, Matt. I'm so glad to be here in this panel. I think this kind of meeting is very important, where activists from Global South and meet with the comrades from the North to learn from each other, to share our people's struggle, to support each other, but also to dream together, because I think this is also, we need like dreams and utopia for the moment, with, as we said before starting, that it's really difficult to find. So it's really important. And also, as Thomas Sankara said, that we don't have to leave to our enemy the monopoly of creativity and imagination. So it's really important. And thank you for having this panel. So my talk will be about the debt and neo-colonialism. I propose to start with colonialism and debt, because I think many of our suffering today and the issues that we are living today, actually they have their roots in colonialism, and started actually by the colonial area. So this, like, for me, it's really important to start with this era. So debt was in many of our countries the main reason and the main pretext to colonize our countries. So if you take countries like Tunisia or Egypt and Morocco, of course, and I will talk about our case in Morocco, the debt was really the direct pretext to colonize our country. For example, and I think it's the case for many countries in the Global South. So for the case of Morocco, the official date for the colonization, which is called the Protectorate, the French colonization in Morocco, started in 1912. But actually, 8 years earlier, the bankers, the French bank, BNP Paribas, was already controlling the economy, controlling the funds. Like the first state department actually was the debt department, which is like to reimburse, I mean, to control and to get their money back. And also in 1907, they created the central bank, La Banque d'État du Maroc, the central bank, the first central bank that was like a private one, and was all again led by this French banks, BNP Paribas. So just to show how this, the debt was really at the origin of the colonization, and the whole economy actually that was imposed, that the capitalist economy, extractive one that was imposed to our people, actually debt was used as also as a moral pretest to colonize and intervene military and conquest our country military. And it's like, they were like just telling like, look guys, we gave you money, you are not able to pay us back. So then we have the right to conquest your countries and to get back our money. And of course, this money was not to help us at all. This is what I'll try to show, okay? And if we talk about the debt after the colonization, actually the debt as the amount of money was also a legacy from the colonization. Like when we got the so-called independence, we inherited from the French colonizers a debt that was decided by the French colonizers. And it's up, for the case of Morocco, it's up to 1 billion dirhams that we had to pay back, while it never served like our people. It was decided by the colonizers for the French private companies. And we continued paying this debt up to 1994. So our official independence was in 1956, but we continued paying the debt up to 1994. It means like 40 years after the independence, our people continue to pay the debt that was decided and contracted by the French colonizers. So for us, it's completely odious and illegitimate debt that French should give us back. But for me, this debt is not the worst legacy. The worst legacy that we got from the colonizers actually is a completely corrupted elite with a very colonized mindset who ruled the country. This elite, who is still ruling the country, was raised by the colonizers and interiorized their logic, including their disregard to our own people and to our culture. So this elite, they put hands in, like they collaborate with the colonizers, with the French and Spanish, and now even with US, and they conduct like a process of accumulation of the wealth by disposition of resources from our people. I'm talking about lands, water, minerals, and so on. So like in simpler words, what was done is actually they just, the local elite raised by the colonizers just continue the robbery that already started with the colonizers. Is exactly what's happened. And so if the debt was a main tool to colonize our country, so main tool for colonialism, I think the debt was also, or has been, because it's still the case, has been a main tool and the main pretext for neocolonialism, which is like in short is neoliberalism. So using this tool of debt, institutions like World Bank and IMF interfere in our economies and impose actually their neoliberal economic policies that was catastrophic for our people and for our economy and even for our ecosystems. So neoliberal economies, policies, so privatization of profitable owned state-owned companies, liberalization of strategic sectors, so energy, telecommunication, water services, export-oriented agriculture, and this the balance sheet of those policies was really catastrophic for our people and our ecosystems, and result in a deep undermining of our sovereignty. So food sovereignty, energy sovereignty. Let me just give you two examples in terms of food sovereignty. So when in 1956, we were exporting grains, cereals toward Europe mainly, and toward French. Like it was 21% of our of export were the grains, the cereals. Today, like last year, 2022, we imported 45 of our grains from Europe. We are the first importer of grains from Europe. Can you imagine that? And everyone who visited Morocco can know how cereal is important and how bread is the base like food for our people. So 50 years or more, like 60 years of applying those new neoliberal policies ended by a complete dependence and undermining of our sovereignty. In terms of for the energy, today the energy sector is completely under the control of the private sector. Up to 74% of our energy are produced by the private sector through what we call like the PPP, the 3 PPP, the public-private partnership, which is like more a socialization of losses and privatization of profit. This is how we call them, which is like so this, and maybe just one thing, like and the privatization actually was embraced by the local elite that I talk about, not only because of their colonized mindset and this idea, this illusion that we should, like, you know, imitate the Western modernity, so-called modernity, and catch up, which is a complete illusion, and it's ecologically impossible, and it's a failure. And we can see it, like our cameras talk about Europe, we can see what's happening in UK, in France, how it's a failure. So why we are trying to imitate something that it's not working? Let's try something else, and maybe we can find solution for Europeans, for our cameras in Europe. Maybe this is our time to propose solution. So this elite, the local elite, embraced that, not only for that, but because they were benefiting directly from those policies. So if you see like the privatization, the French companies benefited from that, but also the local elite, mainly the royal family and the wealthy families in Morocco, benefit from those privatizations. For energy sector, for example, and including the renewable energy. So if you take like the renewable energy, the wind energy is completely under the control of a company owned by the royal, with a joint venture with Engie, the French company. The second part is the like implementation of those policies was not possible without an authoritarian regime. Thanks to this authoritarian regime, those policies was imposed and implemented without any discussion. Or what I talked about, like all those, the privatization, the export-oriented agriculture were never discussed in any form of democratic process. They were imposed, and for multinational, it's kind of a heaven for them. Like, so there's no regulation, like no control, and no, they are not respecting any form of environmental or social regulation or rights. And in the same way, those policies and economic policies reinforce also the authoritarian regime. And today, there is an escalation of repression in our country and the whole region, actually. Like in Egypt, we have much more political prisoners today than in the Mubarak era, which is insane. In my country, today we have up to 170 political prisoners in the prisons, and like including a leader of the movement, uprising movement, for example, the movement of the Rif, the Hirak in the north of Morocco. They were charged up to 20 years because and for a completely peacefully protest. They were asking for road, university, and hospital. So can you imagine that people are charged 20 years prisons just because they were asking for university, road, and hospital, and they still in jail. We have also people, activists in social media, like Saida Al-Alami, who she is now in the prison, charged with 5 years. Then we have also journalists, and including my comrade, Omar, close friend, Omar Radi, who is investigative journalist, and he was charged up to 6 years just because he was doing his work and try to show how people taking benefit of their position close to the power, which is like the palace, to make wealth, to be wealthy. And he is in prison because of that. I think that maybe I'm extending the time, so I will just stop here, and maybe we can get back during the question. And thank you.
Thank you, Jawad. That was really fascinating. And I think this World Bank IMF summit taking place in Morocco is something that we need to have much more on our agenda here on the left in Britain, but also internationally. And also the issue of debt and colonialism is something that, if people are interested in, there's another video as well on the Arise YouTube. You can see our session on the new colonialism, which also goes into some of these important issues that he's raising, and hopefully we can return to in the discussion. Our next speaker is someone who people may have seen speak at other Arise and Labour Friends of Progressive Latin America events as well. She's a Peruvian democracy campaigner, and also from the Centre for Economic and Policy Research, CEPR, which is something I'd really recommend you follow regularly for news and updates. A really brilliant organisation that we've worked with for a long time. So over to you, Francesca Emanuele. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm deeply honored to be here with these amazing panelists and colleagues who tirelessly fight from their own trenches for a better world. So yesterday, a Peruvian leftist leader, a former guerrilla fighter, a former congressman, passed away at the age of 88. His name was Hugo Blanco, and some of you may have heard of him. His struggle against exploitation has been an example for numerous social organizations worldwide. His work in the 60s, organizing campesino and indigenous unions to seize land from feudal-style hacienda owners in the Peruvian Andes, is especially noteworthy. And I didn't want to start this presentation without mentioning a small part of his legacy, because Hugo Blanco is a genuine inspiration. So, you know, when a revolutionary dies, they never truly die. It is with this fighting spirit akin to Blanco's that the working classes of my country, Peru, currently find themselves. Since the end of Fujimori's neoliberal dictatorship in the early 2000s, an inhumane inequality has deepened in Peru, solidifying a de facto apartheid against indigenous and rural communities. Mafias have captured the institutions of my country, and consequently, we have suffered devastating political instability. In just the last 5 years, we have had 6 different presidents. And today, Peruvians live under a new form of dictatorship, falsely legitimized by unjust laws and a constitution still in place, still in force, approved during Fujimori's dictatorship. Current polls indicate a record rejection of the far-right government led by Dina Boluarte, which was installed last December following the impeachment of democratically elected President Pedro Castillo. Now, around 8 out of every 10 Peruvians reject Boluarte's regime, and but despite this widespread rejection, it is those who have the least, the working class and indigenous people, who are now risking themselves, who have been protesting in the streets for 6 months, demanding new elections and true democracy. And earlier this year, in response to massive protests, the Boluarte regime reacted with lethal repression, committing massacres. State forces killed 49 indigenous people and rural residents in what human rights organizations have labeled as extrajudicial executions with a racist bias. Despite the overwhelming evidence of these killings, Boluarte's government remains in power, and no official, listen to me, no official, and there is a lot of evidence, has been prosecuted by a justice system that has also been captured by right-wing forces controlling the Peruvian Congress as well. So this July, the unions and indigenous organizations in my country have called for uninterrupted days of protest. Standing here on this platform, I call upon each and every one of you. Our shared quest for social justice knows no borders. It is a call that unites us all. I invite you to join hands with my people in their courageous struggles. Let your support resonate far and wide. Utilize social media to denounce the oppressive Boluarte regime. Issue statements, publish articles, and organize delegations to Peru. Remember, in unity, we can create ripples of change that echo across nations. And additionally, I don't want to finish without mentioning that the importance of demanding a total halt to arms sales to Peru. Also encourage your elected representatives to withdraw any support for the Boluarte regime. The roots of corruption in Peru run deep, tracing back to our independence era, and our people can't achieve liberation alone. So we need networks of allies standing firmly by our side. Together, let's work towards a new dawn of social justice, not only for Peru, but for the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francesca, and our solidarity to the people of Peru, whose resistance now has been going on for so long and remains at such a high level. It's remarkable, and our solidarity from Britain, but also I'm sure from people internationally on this call too. And also rest in peace, Hugo Blanco, who is someone who I remember reading books about and by him when I was first getting involved in the 90s, and someone who's a international militant that many of us have respected for a long time. And sad news there. The struggle must continue. And also thank you everyone for your questions that are coming in. Please keep them coming. We've got 2 more speakers and then some questions, so there's still plenty of time to put them in. And also, if you're joining us now, I see our numbers are creeping up. Please do also tell us where you're tuning in from. Also, thank you to those who have donated to the cost of hosting today's call. I know it can feel sometimes like we go on about it a lot, but the size of our festival this year and stuff does actually cost thousands of pounds, even though we are a volunteer-only organisation. So every little donation does make a difference. I mentioned in my introduction that the big bosses and their companies organise internationally, and we have to too. So it's great for to have a next speaker from the trade union movement and perspective of a global trade union body. So it's a pleasure to introduce another great friend of Arise Festival, which is Gabriel Rodríguez, who's the Civil Aviation Secretary of the International Transport Workers Federation. Over to you, comrade.
Thank you, Matt. Can you hear me? Good, great, thank you. Well, good afternoon to all. Thank you for this opportunity to share again with you ideas and a possible future that could be more fair to us, to the workers of the world. I work for the ITF, the International Transport Workers Federation, and as Matt said, I am originally from Argentina, originally an aviation worker, an aviation union leader in Argentina, and a few years ago I started helping to coordinate the work at international level of aviation unions. But my federation is for all transport workers. We represent some 700 trade unions in 152 countries, and those unions represent around 20 million transport workers globally. So just to share with you one of the areas we're working on that are related to the debate today. Matt always remembers when he introduces me, he remembers the work that we did in Venezuela to help the workers and the unions, or the unions who survived after the whole of the years where the right-wing policies were taking over the political system in Venezuela. The unions with Chavez and with all the turmoil of those years and all the resistance had difficulties to get together. Then Maduro, as a former union leader, could help them come together, and we helped them to form a federation of transport unions that could support the policies, the pro-worker policies of the government, and it's still very strong and growing, and strong in the new railways, and strong in bringing unity and fighting for the rights of the workers. But that was some years ago. And the reality is that we do this, unfortunately, we have to help rebuild unions all over the world. And in the region in particular, we've seen and we heard a lot about this pendulum of the governments, or people going to the right and to the left. The problem is that the left-wing governments, and in the past, the military governments left the social network completely destroyed. And that social network includes the unions, includes the organizations of the workers. Some of them can resist, some of them have been able to resist through the years, but others were smashed, others were completely disappeared, killed. So rebuilding that mesh, rebuilding that network takes a lot of years. And to help the unions, part of our work is to help those workers or those small organizations to be stronger, to grow, and to be democratic, and to respond to the needs of the workers in this new environment, the new environments that usually when the right-wing governments leave power, they are new hopes and new opportunities. But that does not mean that the unions can start working from the day one to support those policies. And part of our work is to help them rebuild that. We've done it more recently in Brazil with Bolsonaro. We help them resist, and we help them rebuild themselves. In Argentina, we help them resist against Macri's policies against workers and an attack against unions. Fortunately, it was only 4 years, and those policies were so horrendous that he couldn't be re-elected. So the unions could resist, and the unions could support a way of recovering their right to defend their unions, their organizations, and their workers. So we did it in Bolivia after the coup. We've been doing it through the years, and more recently, we are still working in Mexico. We've been there thanks to the opportunity that the new administration from López Obrador is giving to the unions to democratize themselves. Many unions were lost completely, lost to the hands of lawyers or people taking advantage of the historic protection to the unions in order to sell that protection to any corporation that could be able to pay a fee. And we've been doing this with the support of Jeremy Corbyn and his Peace and Justice project. Jeremy has traveled even with us a couple of times, helping us with his contacts in government and in several ministries in order to ensure that we could help the unions get the proper support in order to democratize themselves. Democratize themselves for some groups of workers has been very, very tough, because those leaders have been abusing of the existing organizations, of the existing protection of the law, to protect not the workers, but protect the corporations, protect the new companies, particularly the new companies that were establishing in Mexico through the years. They had a CBA, a collective bargaining agreement, before starting operation, signed with a union. Who's the leader? Nobody knows. Where is the union? Nobody knows. How they are elected? They are not elected, or they've been elected some time ago. So a whole system that was built, or that ended up being through the years, not for the protection of the workers, but the protection of the interests of a few people that were making money out of them. So López Obrador came with new legislation with the support of Congress that gave some time, some months, depending on several aspects, but some time for the unions to recover their connection with the workers, to recover their legitimacy. For that, they had to have assemblies, they have to have systems to vote, they need to have a way of demonstrating to the Ministry of Labor that they are truly representative of the workers that they should be representing. This is not easy. It's really tough, and it's been easier for the unions that never lost a democratic input. There are some in aviation, the pilot unions, the flight attendants unions, but in other sectors it's not being easy. But fortunately, there is a clear vision from López Obrador administration, from the government, in order to ensure that they give the proper support to the workers in order to recover their organizations. And of course, the support of people that are interested in democratizing and in supporting the democratization of unions in Mexico, like Jeremy. I see Jeremy there. Hello, Jeremy. Thanks to these efforts, these unions are recovering their strength, are recovering their representation, and recovering the true link with the workers. This is essential to recover a proper democracy. This is essential for the workers to recover their organizations and fight for their rights. It's true that they needed a government that truly reflected their core values and their interests, but the defense of the rights of the workers should be done by the workers themselves through their organizations, with the support of the government in terms of giving them space and protection in order to do their work. But in reality, it's the decision of the workers themselves through their organizations that need to confront the corporations, confront the employers, fight when necessary, and agree in the end for the benefit of the workers. So I wanted to bring this recent experience. Well, we're still working. It's not only recent. We started recently thanks to the new legislation, but it's ongoing work, and we are very hopeful that this is going to be recovering the network that is necessary for any democracy to bring workers into the day-by-day life of that democracy, to make it a real democracy like the one that we are seeing that is being recovered in Mexico thanks to López Obrador. So I don't know, Matt, very simple today. If there are questions, I will be happy to respond.
Thank you, Gabriel. It's interesting to hear about the work the ITF is doing. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I see our numbers are still going up on social media and elsewhere. We've got over 400 people live with us now. We're moving on to our final speaker now, and then I think for those speakers who can stay, we'll have one big round of questions, because I can see so many of you putting in good comments in that Q&A box, so please keep on with that. Our next speaker is Jeremy Corbyn, long-time campaigner for international justice, founder of the Peace and Justice Project, MP for Islington North for the last 40 years, and someone that from the Rise Festival point of view would like to thank for all the support he's given us as we approach our 5th birthday next week. Over to you, Jeremy.
Matt, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Great. I'm in SOAS at the moment. We've just been doing a book launch for a book about tennis and apartheid and the struggle that tennis players made in this country and were not recognized as proper tennis players by the British authorities. And it's I knew some of the people involved in that struggle many years ago, but some struggles never cease, and ours doesn't cease either. I'm really pleased we're having this call today. I'm really pleased at the global nature of it and the fact we're linking up trade union struggles with peace struggles, environmental struggles, and so much more all around the world. And that is absolutely crucial to the way that we organize ourselves and behave. As you said, I'm representing the Peace and Justice Project, which we founded after the 2019 election as a political space for people to come to, whether they're in the Labour Party or in any other organisation, and we can promote various issues, crucially the 5 points that we put forward concerning wages, concerning housing, concerning health services, concerning environmental sustainability and protection, and crucially global issues, starting with the treatment of refugees, but moving on to the more global issues of peace and anti-war activities all around the world. The Peace and Justice Project is also affiliated to Progressive International, and we're holding a congress in Brazil in August, which is the first physical congress you will have held, and it's in Brazil for a reason, because we celebrate the election of President Lula as being returned as president of Brazil, but also the whole hopeful movement, the brilliant movement of the left across Latin America that's done so much to give real hope to people, not just in Latin America, but all around the world as well. We are at the moment, obviously, faced with the situation of the war in Ukraine. I believe that Russia was wrong to invade Ukraine, and I believe that the loss of life is appalling and unnecessary, both of Ukrainian soldiers and civilians, and Russian soldiers, and increasingly now Russian civilians as well. There has to be a way out of this war. I do not believe there's going to be a military victory for anybody in this war. The longer it goes on, the more people will be killed, the more people will be driven into exile as refugees, and the more damage that's done to food supplies around the world, and the more the world will become divided as a result of it. So it's interesting that the UN either didn't want to or wasn't able to bring about a ceasefire, and had very little effect on preventing the war taking place. It's interesting that it's the African Union and the Latin American leaders that have been far more proactive and far more positive in trying to bring this about. I think there are two reasons for that. One is that neither continent, Latin America or Africa, is involved in the war in any way whatsoever. But both continents do trade extensively with Russia and with Europe. And in the case of particularly North Africa, rely very heavily on both Ukraine and Russia for grain imports and food supplies. So it's interesting that a delegation of African leaders went to Kiev and went to St. Petersburg to see President Putin and put forward proposals on a way forward in this particular conflict. I say congratulations to them for making that effort. And you never know, it might be something that will begin to bear fruit alongside the demands made by the Pope. And also the role that China has played in this war, again, trying to bring about some kind of peace process there. But this, of course, underlines the differences that are now happening in the world. All of us on this call have grown up in the period of the Cold War. Then post-Cold War, the power of the United States to set the agenda, the power of the United States to go to war in Afghanistan, in Iraq and other places. And that sort of unipolar world is now under challenge from the economic power of China and the diplomatic power of the rest of the world as the process for hopefully bringing about peace in Ukraine is beginning to demonstrate. So I think it's quite important that we don't allow ourselves to be completely confused in all this by the role of the Western media, which seems to refuse to recognize that we don't need in this world leadership by one particular economic power or continent or country. What we need is a process that recognizes the issues that are facing this world and attempts to bring about some kind of peace and security. Real security isn't the ability to kill each other. Real security is about jobs, as our comrades from the ITF and others have been pointing out, is about decent pay levels, is about health, is about education, is about environmental sustainability. Some of these things are very far away at the present time. The last thing I want to say is about the crisis around the world of refugees and the rise of racism in our society. All of last week, I was in Strasbourg at the Council of Europe, where I'm one of the British parliamentary delegation to the Council of Europe, and also I'm a member of the Migration Committee, which deals with the issues of illegal pushbacks and so on. And we met in the time of this terrible loss of life off the coast of Greece, when at least 500 people appear to have perished in the ship that sank off the Greek coast while it was carrying people to Europe. All the Western governments were very quick to blame people traffickers and people smugglers and exploiters and so on. Yeah, of course they're exploiters, of course they're people traffickers, of course what they're doing was appalling and wrong, and they were only doing it to make a lot of money. But who created the market from which they could do all of that, other than the immigration policies of Western Europe and other parts of the world as well? Those people died because of the racism in policy making all across Europe. And I was forced to challenge the remarks made by various very right-wing members in the debating chamber last week in Strasbourg, and pointed out that Europe actually has a minority of the world's refugees trying to get into Europe. There are 70 million refugees around the world. Most of them are being hosted in countries that do not have the resources or the wherewithal to give them any kind of support to look after them. Rohingya in Bangladesh being one example of this. And so we do need to have an approach to refugees, which is about recognizing them firstly as human beings trying to survive in a difficult world, and secondly, people that want to make a contribution to our world as a whole. But instead, we have the media in the USA, in Europe, and probably in other countries as well, just screaming headlines about the danger, the threat, the invasion and so on of refugees. Refugees are victims of wars, often those created by the very countries in which they're trying to gain asylum. And so the war in Afghanistan, 21 years of it, billions spent, tens of thousands of dead, and what's it left behind but the poorest, most food-starved country in the whole world as a result of all of that military expenditure. So what we do need is that call for peace and that call for hope around the world. There are many reasons to be hopeful. Those that have voted for a change in Latin America, those that have voted for a change in other parts of the world. But those changes are not achieved by politicians just being elected to office. They're changed by trade unions, they're changed by popular action, they're changed by community activities. It is about building that sense of movement about how we bring about real security in the world. The security of being able to live safely, work, healthcare for your children and yourselves, and of course, opportunities for education for all. That's what real peace and real justice around the world is about. And the last thing I conclude with is this. Our information comes from media, often media controlled by very powerful global corporations. And that media has an agenda with it. And you find Facebook closing down when it's uncomfortable for certain governments around the world. You find all of the media platforms being denied to us. And then you find that real journalists who do tell the truth pay a terrible price. The numbers of journalists that are in prison around the world that have been murdered because of their work, real journalists trying to expose corruption and injustice. And then you look at the situation facing Julian Assange. Julian Assange now more than 4 years in Belmarsh prison in Britain, maximum security prison with truly horrible conditions in it, and threatened with removal to the United States, where he will be in prison for over 140 years. A death sentence against somebody whose only crime has been to expose to the world the truth about the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the truth about the undermining of democratic governments around the world, and the truth about the power of global corporations to destroy our environment. Together, we are very, very strong. Let's not allow ourselves to be minimized, marginalized, or defeated by the siren calls for those that only believe in economic injustice, inequality, and don't care about the environment that they are destroying at the same time. That's why we have these calls. That's why we have these meetings. But above all, it's about our actions in promoting real change in this world. Matt, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy, and a pleasure to have you with us, and all our support and solidarity from Arise as ever. For those speakers that can stay on the call, we're now going to have some questions. What I'm going to do is take people in the same order that you originally spoke, and I'm going to ask a number of questions now that have come in, and if each speaker just picks one or two that they feel interested in to answer, and also sums up for, say, about 30 seconds to a minute each, and that's how we'll do it, because I am keen to have some audience participation. So first of all, I've got two questions from Facebook. One says, in the UK and elsewhere, it feels like there's mounting pressure to pick a side in a dangerous new Cold War between the US and China. What can we do to push a different view of foreign policy in the mainstream? A second one from Facebook. For many people, it can be hard to see, and I think this relates maybe to some of what Jawad was talking about. For many people, it can be hard to see how protests on the streets can intervene into the international forums where elite decision-making happens. How do social movements assert themselves not only against our governments, but in those institutions? And then over to Zoom, a question from Ian, which I think is specific for Francesca, which says there were reports around the turn of the year that the regime in Peru had effectively lost control of state power in much of the Andes. Does Francesca think that's an accurate description? And has the situation gone forward, back, or stayed the same in the last 6 months? A nice comment here from Steve, who says, thank you, Jawad from Morocco. Your talk was excellent. What is the best way to help? And some great anti-capitalist comments from our friend Kirsty Lowe, as ever. Welcome, Kirsty. And Kirsty also has a question which maybe relates to Walter and some of the other speakers. which is how do we make sure that we're much more singing on the same hymn sheet in the left, is how she phrases it. How do we sort of amplify a joint message across different bits of the left and across borders? And I think I've got one more, but I can't find it. One more from, again, from on Zoom is, no, two more. So one is, can we hold hope, and maybe this is relevant for the Brazilian comrade, can we hold hope that the USA is overstretching itself and trying to intervene in things in so many areas of the world, such as the Pacific, Central South America, the Middle East, etc., etc. And then a question on the far right and how they get away with it, which is the final question I'll read out for people to choose from, again on Zoom. And that says, surely the biggest factor in the rise of the far right is the terrible quality of the opposition at the neoliberal extreme centre insists on counterposing to them. So that's quite a wide range of topics. Hopefully our speakers will find one thing they can comment on, and we'll go through in the same order again. So if we go to Aline first.
Thank you so much, Matt. Jeremy, so good to see you again in a much more hopeful environment here in Brazil. I would like to start with the comment about U.S. imperialism in Latin America. We know that this is something that has, well, a long, well-recorded history. U.S. has been meddling with the Latin American affairs for as long as we can remember. But there is one thing that is happening right now that is really important, is that we are once again trying to build consultation spaces, relationship with our neighbors that enable us to have independent forums of organization. A couple of weeks ago, here in Brazil, in Brasilia, President Lula hosted a meeting with all the 12 presidents from South America. This is something huge, historical. We haven't seen a meeting like this in the last, I would say, 10 to 15 years. So this is a very hopeful sign that we are now in a new, or rather trying again to restart this process of regional integration that hopefully will make us stronger. Because this is something that is really important when we look at the integration in Americas. We always look at forums where the United States has the final answer, has the final word. And now we are building spaces where we can work as a whole, as a sovereign region to try to fight this back. And there's another trend that is really important, that is the internationalism of the people. So we see now different spaces where organizations, popular organizations, can now meet, other than the historical ones, such as Foro de São Paulo, that is more related to the parties, Alba Movimentos that is more related to popular movements, but new spaces, new consultation forums where all these amazing, popular struggles can come together. I think this is a very hopeful sign for us, something to keep an eye on. But also we have to remind that U.S. imperialism will only be defeated when we go beyond our borders, when we move beyond this and we struggle against imperialism as one, as one of our main and most important enemies, our most important struggle right now, because it is exactly this imperialism that gives space to all these other very concerning trends that we see right now. As for the far right, I think this is this is something that we are seeing really in firsthand here in Brazil. Although it is really important for us to regain the power through popular vote, to democratic means, to elections, this is not enough to really overcome the trend of the far right. This is something that runs deeper in our societies, and we see that they, even when they are not in, let's say, institutional power in the government, they are still powerful enough to move all those different pieces that might lead to destabilization, coup d'etats, and so on. So I think having that in mind, and having in mind that, yes, we have to create new forms of opposition, new forms to fight it back, it's something that is going to be paramount for us to really create a fair, equal, just, democratic society. Thank you so much.
Thank you. A very comprehensive answer in just 2 minutes. Really brilliant. Thank you, Aline. Our next we go back to Walter. Oh, I think you're muted, Walter.
Sorry. One remark on the far right. I think we here in Austria have a little, however, valuable experience that fighting the far right is possible and can succeed under the condition that you have a credible political offer from the left, meaning politicians who say what they do and do what they say. And I believe that this is, so to say, the essential point. The political point is we must be aware that we see, at least in Europe, a very strong coalition emerging between the far right and the conservative right. And this we must fight with all means, and by creating alliances which even go beyond the traditional family of the left and even the liberal forces. But third, and this I think is important to understand, that the fight against the far right also has a cultural and, I would say, psychological dimension. The mindset of the people in our societies, to a large extent, are colonialized, meaning people are used to have cheap clothes, cheap food, which are imported through scandalous trade treaties between countries of the global south and the privileged countries. And we must change this. We must explain to people that Europe has to redefine its role in the world, and partially, this also pops up in the issue of migration, because people feel in Europe that something is on the way to change, and that will affect our societies. And I believe our societies must embrace these changes. They must understand not only that they are necessary, but that would be a fairer world, it would be a more just world, and it would be also a more democratic and a more social world. And my second remark refers to the transnationalization of politics. Indeed, this is a global fight. This is a European fight. The party which I represent is a party which unites 35 parties, left-leaning parties in Europe from 25 countries. It is the biggest part of the political left in Europe, but it's not the complete left in Europe. And we need to develop dialogue and the capacity of uniting on a more broader level. And we need also to unite with the forces in the global south. I'm heading tomorrow for Brazil for participating in the Sao Paulo Forum, and then participating in a seminar organized by the Sao Paulo Forum and the European Left Party on shared visions. And I believe this is the way we have to develop ourselves, because we can learn from one another and we can find out ways how to converge in practical terms. And last not least, again in Brazil. We meet again for the meeting of the Progressive International. And I think these are signs of hope. They must be strengthened. They must be more systematically developed also to the field of media cooperation and intellectual cooperation, because the fight in Europe and worldwide is far from being lost. It much depends on our capacity to develop unity and to develop solidarity between the diverse forces which are represented in the social movements and in the political left.
Thank you, Walton. It's been great to make that connection with you from Arise, and we hope to stay in touch and do more together. Straight on to Jawad now in Morocco.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, and again, I'm really happy to be part of this panel and see how people are struggling in many places of the world. I mean, in Peru, in Brazil, in Morocco, in Europe. This is for me really is a source of hope, like to avoid this the apocalyptic capitalist plan that we have now. I mean, that leading the world to more barbarism. So it's really, really important to, again, to learn from each other and to try to globalize resistance against this globalized catastrophic capitalist system that is ruling the world today. Okay, so I will start with the question: what is the best way for European comrades, I'd like to help, or European people to help the struggles that we have, our people are leading in our countries? I would say just push or make pressure on your government to not to interfere in our countries. I think this, for me, is the only demand that I can make. Each time the Europeans or Western countries interfere in our countries is a mess, and we have seen it in Afghanistan, and Jeremy talked about how was bad in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in many countries, and how when Julian Assange tried like just to show how bad it was, now he is persecuted, exactly like my comrades, Omar Radi, who is now in the jail because he tried to do his work as a journalist and show how the local elite taking benefit of their power to get wealthy and to amass. So this is for the first question. So I would say, like, just make pressure on your governments to stop interfering in our country and stop this myth that they will free and find solution for the world. No, I mean, we are not relying on Europeans to solve our problems. Our people are able to solve their own problems. We are relying more to the most oppressed people who are able to free themselves and free us all. So this is our really deep conviction. For the second question, I'm not sure that I understood, Matt. So it was like, why, if the protests that are going on are against the institutions or against the regime, the local elite? Is that the question?
I think the question was more the international institutions, I guess, such as World Bank or the UN, seem so remote that how can you get people to motivate to take protests into bodies of that seem so far away from them, I suppose.
Okay, but let's say that, like, a concrete, and maybe it's also linked to this question, but a concrete way to support us is to participate to our coming counter summit in Marrakesh in next October. So next October, from the 9th to the 5th to the 16th of October, World Bank and IMF decided to hold their annual meeting in Morocco for the second time in Africa. So the first time was in Kenya 50 years ago, and now they decided to do it in Morocco. So social movement, grassroots movements in Morocco and in MENA region, in Africa, we are already organizing to make it known that those two institutions were responsible for the destruction of many ecosystems by promoting extractivist policies in our countries. They are responsible for the suffering and the dying of our people. So they are not welcome. We don't want them to come. So we want to make it known. And this is why we are organizing a counter summit in Marrakesh from the 12th to the 15th. And here I'm like making an official invitation to Jeremy, but to all you guys, like to come, because it's very important. The participant of comrades from other countries will be a huge support for us to make it happen, because we are also suffering from a lot of repression and harassment. So we are really right. So when I met in Marrakesh, sorry, Jeremy, you want to say something?
Yes, could you repeat those dates again?
From the 12th to the 15th.
Of which month?
October, sorry.
October, sorry, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so when I met in Marrakesh, of course, to learn from each other, to discuss and to try to understand where we are living today, but also to discuss alternatives, because I think we do have alternatives, because I think one of the main criticisms that we had, like as anti-globalization movement, like we are just criticized, we don't have alternatives. This is not true. Let me just give one example for the debt, because I prepared like myself for debt. So then let me just give one example. In our network, the CADTM, for the abolition of the debt, what we're asking for is actually a repudiation of the debt, which means like a sovereign decision from the global South countries to repudiate, to cancel this debt, because it's illegitimate. I showed how, like the original sin actually in my country, it was the colonial debt that we are paying, and most of the debt never served our people. So we asked for this, the repudiation, and the tool for that we are proposing is a citizen audit of the debt. And when we are talking about citizen audit, it means like how to get people involved in this process to open the books and try to answer basic questions. Who decide to take those debts? Who spent them? Which interests? Who took benefit of those debt? And in most of the time, and we were involved in Greece and in Ecuador and in many countries, and we showed how those debts actually are illegitimate and should be cancelled and should be repudiated. But the involvement of people, and this is why we are talking about citizen audit, it's very important, because again, we are relying more on the people on below and the struggles of the people, rather than any begging people from the north to cancel this debt. This is not, for us, this debt is illegitimate. We should stop it, because if we stop paying the debt, as Sankara said, if we stop paying the debt, the lenders will not die. But if we continue to pay this debt, we will die. And our people are bleeding to death because we are paying. Because most of the time you will find that this debt is absorbing, in my country, for example, more than the third of the budget. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jawad. Sorry, I'm just aware that some of our speakers need to leave soon, so I'm just keen to get them all in for a quick response. Next, Francesca.
Yeah, so I want to mention, thank you for the question. For a brief period of time, it was true that the Boluarte regime in Peru lost control over the population of Juliaca in Puno, which is located in the Peruvian Andes. In this region, for you to know, the government committed a massacre, killing 18 people in a single day in this January. Unfortunately, the resistance and fight against the government in Juliaca, where the massacre took place, was met with severe repression, brutal repression. The government deployed the military and imposed continuous state of emergency for 6 months, the population of this region has been under a state of emergency with all their rights suspended. But what brings some hope right now is that both the government and Congress are deeply despised by the people in Peru. People even from like middle class, not only working class people and indigenous people. 80% of the population rejects the government and 90% of the population rejects the Congress of Peru. So wherever these officials go, the president, congressmen, they are met with protests and active rejection. This widespread discontent forces them to limit their public appearances and confines themselves to the capital city. I don't know who can continue running a country in this situation. So the struggle for democracy in Peru remains ongoing. And despite the current uncertainty about the future, the widespread rejection of the far-right authorities by millions of people is not going anywhere.
Thank you, Francesca, and thank you for joining us so often this year to update us on what's happening in Peru. We really appreciate the work you're doing. Gabriel?
Thank you, Matt. I think I have a question about the lawfare in Argentina and how the left is reacting. Well, the lawfare, most of you know very well. It's an old term, but it got very popular in Brazil in 2014 when an invented case against Lula forced him out of the election, avoided him to be a candidate. There were no proof. The case was dismissed later on. It was proved, it was very clear that it was all an invention. But what's important is that there was a very clear triangle. It was the right wing, Bolsonaro at that time, who was interested because he wanted, if Lula couldn't be a candidate, it was much easier for him to win, and he won. The judiciary that has to take these cases, even if they don't have proof, they have to take them seriously. Then years after, they can dismiss it, or it can get to another level in the judiciary that says there's no proof and it's just lost. But in the beginning, there needs to be an initiation of the process, even without the proof. And then the third part of this association is the press. The press gives legitimacy to the case, and of course made it very visible, so that it makes a political issue out of the supposed corruption case that should be dealt by the judiciary only. It was very clear in 2014 in Brazil. It was very clear in 2016 in Argentina, in a case against Cristina Fernández de Kirchner. And the question is, how is the lawfare in Argentina? I would say it's alive and kicking. It's still a tool very well used, very oiled by these three actors, and are trying again to seize power by using it. We should say that on top of the lawfare against Cristina Fernández, there was an attempt to kill her, a clear attempt to kill her. But the judiciary is not moving forward in the investigation on who are the real perpetrators, the ones behind the ones that are in jail, that are the ones that did it for some pennies. Fortunately, there are elections by the end of the year, and fortunately there is some hope of the unity of the progressive movements, the left, and the ones that want to confront the right in the Peronism and in some other sectors. So there is hope that there is going to be resistance, but the resistance, again, the lawfare, and how to eradicate it, it's going to take, I would say, decades. There is a process against the judiciary, there is a process in Congress, but if you don't have majority in Congress, you cannot confront the judiciary, because, of course, we usually respect the law and respect the process. The right wing then comes and govern by decree. They don't care. But we have to do everything by the rule and take special care. So deposing a judiciary system, a Supreme Court that is part of this system and part of this lawfare is going to take several years. What is clear is that there is a majority in Congress that is needed, and we hope, the unions hope, that it's going to be achieved somehow, or closer to be achieved somehow, in this next election in October this year. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Gabriel, and sorry for rushing everyone. It's been a brilliant discussion with over 400 people joining us, and as this festival has gone on, we've had a lot more people watching back our sessions, especially on YouTube, so please do keep spreading the word. Before our final sum up from Jeremy, I'd like to quickly thank everyone again. Please do donate to Arise if you can, and even consider becoming a friend of Arise to help us expand our work. We must keep working together to put forward socialist ideas, and a key part of that is our internationalism, as we've heard today, and standing in solidarity with those progressive forces globally that we have so much in common with, as we've heard from today. Final thing for me, please note that the next evening Arise event is our closing rally this Wednesday, and we're really pleased this year for the first time that will be joint with the Socialist Future comrades from Young Labour and Labour students who are doing a great job of keeping the red flag flying there. So we'll be hearing also from a lot of the strikes currently going on, so please do be there on Wednesday. Over to you, Jeremy, to close the event.
Matt, thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who's been on the call and spoken today, because I think it's been really valuable and very interesting. And I just want to make 3 very quick points, if I could, because we need to finish. 1, total solidarity with the people of Peru about what they're going through at the present time. Their president should not be in prison. The elections should be restored, and elected government should be in place in Peru. And well done all the other Latin American governments that have spoken out in solidarity with the people of Peru, because the movement that elected President Lula, that elected the new president in Colombia, and has done so much across Latin America, has got to continue and grow further and further to end injustice, poverty, and inequality all across the continent, because that fundamentally is what it is all about. Second point, I absolutely agree with the points just made by Walter Baier about the rise of the far right, not just in Europe, but also across the world. There is a significant far right in Brazil, there's significant far right in many countries in the world. And last week I was in the Council of Europe in Strasbourg, and I was listening to the speeches made by many of the far right there. It is terrifying, it is frightening. Their whole narrative is essentially demonizing refugees as the new scapegoat for all the economic ills. And they have an appeal to voters who feel completely disenfranchised. So if the left doesn't offer an alternative which is about increasing wages, at least to keep pace with inflation, if the left doesn't have an alternative which is about maintaining decent levels of public service and public ownership, in the case of Britain, of mail, rail, water and energy, but there are other candidates as well for that, then the left will lose out, because the left will not be offering a proper alternative. That's why we've had the 5 demands from the Peace and Justice Project, which are on our website, and you're obviously all very, very welcome to look at them. And I'm sure that they were something that you would support, because they meet with the basic demands of anyone remotely on the left anywhere in the world. That's the whole point behind them. The third point I make is this. The broadsheet newspapers and the sort of weekend columnists talk endlessly about culture wars, usually in a sort of disparaging way and so on. I want to approach it from a different point of view. Sometimes our appeal is based on the numbers of meetings we do, and often quite small events that we do. But it's also about the cultural lives of people. The idea of a more just and better and socialist future isn't just going to be achieved by our ability at speaking at meetings. It's also about music, about imagination, and about art. And it's inspiring people, particularly young people, that being a member of a trade union, being a member of a political movement doesn't mean you leave behind all the brilliance of art, of music, of imagination, of poetry and culture. It is about doing many other things as well. And so I just think we should always think in terms of the cultural values of what we're saying and what we're doing, and the understanding of the history of struggle that has brought about fundamental changes. As I said earlier, I've just been speaking at a meeting, launching a book about one aspect of the struggle against apartheid. There are many other such events going on around the world, but the fundamental understanding of history is what's so absolutely crucial to everything that we do. These calls, these global calls that we're making, are key to our understanding the struggles that are going on in each other's countries, but recognizing if you're an Uber delivery rider in London, in Bogota, in Buenos Aires, in New Delhi, or in Sydney, Australia, or in New York, you're basically working for yet another platform company that doesn't care about you, doesn't give you any rights, doesn't give you any protection, doesn't give you any safety, and you are a victim of a form of global capitalism that will exploit you to the ends of the earth. The only antidote to that is international trade unionism. That's why I was so pleased that the International Transport Federation were included in this call, and the incredible work that they're doing in improving unionization, not just in Latin America, but in many other parts of the world. And Laura Alvarez, who does a great deal of the international work for the Peace and Justice Project, sends her greetings to this event as well. Because when we speak together, we're stronger, we're better informed, and that's how we go forward to build that world of peace and justice.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you everyone for a really great discussion. We'll be in touch again, and thank you. See you on Wednesday.